that is a form of corruption. And the reason we're having these impeachment proceedings now is because the president has now been caught for that. Now that there is no question by the president's own admission, by the evidence provided by the White House, by one and now it looks like two whistleblowers who appear to have nailed him for doing that, now that the president is being impeached for doing that, the president's response is just to say the word corruption over and over again. Corruption, 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 corruption. All I care about is corruption. I'm here to work on corruption. I'm not corrupt. You're corrupt. Joe Biden's the corrupt one. Nancy Pelosi's the corrupt one. Impeach me, impeach Adam Schiff. He's the corrupt one. All I care about is corruption. All these people coming after me, they're corruption. But when it comes to the accusation that he has been flinging against Vice President Joe Biden, the broader circumstance there is that Joe Biden, as vice president, was the American government's point person working with the government of Ukraine to try to combat actual corruption in that country. And so therefore, you've now got the president and his allies pointing at Joe Biden and yelling, corruption, corruption. Yeah. Look how close he is to that corruption in Ukraine. He's the corrupt one, can't you tell? I mean, it's the same dynamic that we went through around this phrase, the fake news, right? The media tries to expose and fact check these fake stories that are being circulated to try to benefit Trump. Well, that effort itself, that fact-checking effort, that's fake news. Oh, you're the fake news. Everything you do is fake news. The whole news media is fake news. I mean, what they're trying to do is take this word away from their accusers to try to make any reference to the president's corruption seem like this sort of muddy crossfire where there's allegations of corruption on all sides. And who can say? Right? As with their adoption and perversion of that phrase, fake news, they are trying to make us basically linguistically incapable of characterizing the very real and very simple thing for which the president is being impeached. Right? The president saying corruption, corruption, corruption as if he is a force for anti-corruption now. It seems hilarious to hear him say it, given what he's been like as president and given what he's being impeached for right now. But I do believe that we are on a very short time frame now before which we will not be able to really use the word corruption anymore to talk about this scandal for which the president is being impeached. Because by his sheer repetition of it and the adoption of it by his supporters and by the conservative media for it to mean the opposite of the real English use of that word, the word will become meaningless, will become something that is no longer available to us. It will become something that means both its real meaning and its opposite. It'll be an unspeakable, unusable part of this political trauma. I am in Los Angeles tonight because I'm in the middle of the book tour for my new book, Blowout. And I feel oddly like writing parts of this book prepared me more than I might have expected for this moment in the news, for trying to understand what's going on. Because one of the things I wrote about in the book is that one of the real benefits for Russia being an oil and gas power is that Vladimir Putin has very much enjoyed using oil and gas as a weapon against other countries. He has used oil and gas to directly threaten and coerce other countries into doing what he wants. You know, he can shut the lights off in neighboring countries if they're dependent on Russian gas. And that's very true in the immediately neighboring countries of the former Soviet sphere. It's also true by extension into big parts of Western Europe, including the NATO powerhouse of Germany. I mean, Russia is not that strong a country. They don't have a strong economy, they don't have a strong military, they don't have that much to offer in terms of things other nations might want, let alone want to emulate. But if they can turn off your source of heat in a given January, you might nevertheless have to do what they want. The other way Russia has used oil and gas, particularly in the nation of Ukraine, which Putin would really like to have become part of Russia again. I mean, I don't know if he wants to rebuild the Soviet Union on a smaller scale minus the Soviet, but he's been taking parts of Ukraine for himself. And what has been handy about Russia's oil and gas power in Ukraine, as Putin tries to dominate and disassemble it for his own purposes, is that he's used his huge influence over the energy sector in Ukraine to corrupt Ukraine, to keep Ukraine corrupt, to keep it corrupt on purpose so that Ukraine's government stays weak, so that Russia can manipulate public institutions and politicians who it has corrupted by cutting them in on oil and gas deals. I mean, well before this current scandal, I was writing this freaking book, in part, on how Russia basically created a sort of La Brea tar pit of corruption in the energy sector in Ukraine in a way that is politically handy to them, because any politician that brushes up against that mess that they have deliberately created there, even if that politician has brushed up against it because they're trying to clean it up, those politicians can themselves be called corrupt. They can be prosecuted even, because look at their proximity to that notoriously corrupt Ukrainian energy sector. You're trying to clean up the corruption here? No, you're the corrupt one. Before Paul Manafort became Donald Trump's campaign chairman in 2016, running those kinds of operations against politicians in Ukraine was kind of one of his political specialties. I mean, he was a real political Svengali in Ukraine. He would run these types of ops against politicians whom he wanted out of the way. He would accuse them of corruption, even if their only proximity to real corruption was the fact that they were the ones trying to clean it up. That was Manafort. That was a Manafort special in Ukraine, back before he became Trump's campaign chairman. It's what they're trying to do to Joe Biden in Ukraine today. And we have since learned in this current scandal for which the president is being impeached that his lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, has been regularly consulting with Paul Manafort from prison on how best to make this accusation against Joe Biden and how best to leverage the Ukrainian government into helping Trump slime Joe Biden with it. They've been consulting with Manafort on that from Manafort's prison cell. Well, now, over the weekend, we have learned that in addition to trying to put together these backwards, words have no meaning accusations against Joe Biden, right, to try to turn his anti-corruption efforts in Ukraine into some sort of evidence of his corruption, we've since learned in the last few days that the other thing Giuliani and his guys on the ground in Ukraine have been working for, trying to do themselves, is that they've been trying to do their own little deals. They've been trying to cash in themselves on some Ukrainian natural gas opportunities. The AP today telling this lurid story about Giuliani's guys on the ground in Ukraine sidling up to a Ukrainian natural gas company and making an offer that nobody should refuse. Touting their advanced knowledge that the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine was about to be fired and replaced, which in fact was true, and they did have advanced knowledge of it. Touting their inside track on forthcoming U.S. government policy about Ukraine. Touting their connections to both Giuliani and Trump. And with those connections, saying to an executive at a Ukrainian natural gas company, hey, wouldn't you, my friend, like to find yourself becoming the new CEO of the biggest natural gas company in this country? We can make that happen. All you got to do is hook us up thereafter with the kinds of contracts that will make us not just henchmen, but oligarch henchmen. Did I mention that we're working for Rudy on this? And that we've got inside information about what's about to happen with U.S. policy? Watch, we'll make it happen. They're fighting corruption, remember? The AP has incredible reporting on this today. Politico had some incredible reporting on this over the weekend. Rudy Giuliani's comments to Politico on this is one for the ages. He told Politico, and I quote, I may or may not know anything about it. Which, you gotta give it to Mayor Giuliani, that is undoubtedly true. He may or may not know anything about it. Zero Pinocchios for that. But as the president is getting impeached for this scandal, for trying to get help against the Democrats and against his potential 2020 opponent from a foreign country, the effort that we are going to see here, what we have already started living through here, is an effort to, I'm rubber, you're glue, his way out of this, to turn the behavior for which the president has now been caught, not just into some amorphous and unnecessarily complicated thing that doesn't really have any inherent meaning, but also to try to make his sins our sins, right? To try to absolve himself of his own crimes by putting what he did and what he and his sort of henchmen in Ukraine have been doing to try to put those crimes on everybody else's rap sheet. And I know it is hard to follow the twists and turns of the story as it continues to develop right now, but just a heads up on this part of it, right? We are in the middle of them trying to redefine this whole thing, to try to make this simple case as messy as possible, and to try to make it seem like whatever the president did must have been done by his accusers first and worse. We've seen them do this before with language and with the no puppet, you're the puppet argument. If it works against this impeachment thing, there's no grounds on which factually based accusations can ever be brought against this president. If it doesn't work in this impeachment thing, we will have taken giant steps forward as a country toward not being manipulated this way again, the way we have so badly for the last 3 years. Luckily, we have as our first guest tonight a person who I have somewhat desperately wanted to get on this show ever since this story first broke. Tonight is the first time we have been able to get him. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.